Hi guys, this video is on Analysing Graphs by Rebecca Mills. So having a look at this first graph that we created using our own data, we start by looking at the title of the graph. That tells us what the graph is about. So in this particular case, this graph is on the month of birth of students in Year 6 at Somerset College 2014. I can see my y-axis has the number of students labelled and my x-axis shows the months of the year. So I can tell which students were born in which month. Sentences I can write about this graph or extracting the information or analysing this graph would be: most students in Year 6 at Somerset College 2014 were born in June. So that's 14 of the total amount were born in June. The least number of students were born in January, August and December. That's 6 students each. So that's extracting some information from this graph. Are there any trends in this graph? As time goes along the x-axis in terms of the months of the year, is there any pattern to the data? Well, it goes low, high, and so forth. Looks like there's a little bit of a leap there, but no general trend. So I'd say there's no trends in this data. Let's have a look at the next graph. This is a graph from your booklet on mining. Let's start by seeing it's a bar graph. So these are good for comparing a couple of different sources of information, display comparisons. So let's start by looking at the title of the graph, wealth per capita. So it's a graph that is showing us how much money exists in each country for the people and for their natural resources. So wealth per capita. The source of this data is the World Bank report, which is a reliable source. The data is created in 1995, which I'd say would be a little bit old. So 1995 is probably a little bit old for information. Good to note these things. I look at my y-axis and I can see that these are going up in 100,000s, which is nice and even. It doesn't have a label, but it's showing me the dollar value of the amount of wealth. So I understand what that axis is telling me. This x-axis seems to have a list of countries. So now extracting information from the graph. Let's look at the highest point here. I can see that this value is about $570,000. I can see it's talking about the natural wealth of Australia. So Australia is the country that has the most natural wealth out of those listed at $570,000 per capita. Australia's human wealth is much lower at around $180,000 per capita. Another sentence I could write about this graph, or more information that I can retrieve, is the wealthiest country for human wealth would be Luxembourg, with $530,000 per person or per capita. Looking at any trends, you can see that it seems that the natural wealth is increasing as we go across the graph here, but it doesn't mean anything because the axes are not in any particular order. There's no reason Iceland needs to be there, Canada there, and so forth. The creator of the graph has just ordered it according to natural wealth. So there's no real trend in natural wealth across the country. Let's look at the next graph. This is a pie graph. Pie graphs are great for when your total of values add up to 100%. So you can see here that each of these percentages add up to 100%. So pie graphs are useful for that reason. You can't use a pie graph if any of the events occur twice. So let's start with the title. What is this graph about? It's about Australia's main export industries. From the information of the graph, I can see that 37.6% of Australian export industry goes to mining. That's this chunk here. So this particular section of the graph is the biggest, meaning that mining is the biggest export industry at this time. Checking the source of the data, that's 2010, and the source is the Australian Government Department of Industries, Innovation, Industry, Science and Research. So it's reliable data and it's fairly recent. So mining is the biggest export industry next to manufacturing, which is at 32.5%. The least industry that has the least amount of exporting looks like it is other, which I'm not sure what that is. So agriculture at 4.9% seems to be the smallest industry for export. So these are all sentences I could write about this graph, or information that I could analyse from the graphs. Okay, let's look at this graph. This is a line graph. Line graphs are great for showing trends over time. And here you can see this x-axis is all time, from about 1970 to about 2010. What is the information this graph is showing us? Well, you have a look at the title of the graph. It's Exports by Industry, Share of Nominal Exports Financial Years. The source is from the ABS, or Australian Bureau of Statistics, and the Reserve Bank of Australia, so that's a reliable source of data. What's some information this graph's telling us? Well, this y-axis has got percentages up to 50%, and as we said before, the x-axis has years. So I can see that this graph only goes up to 50%. If you have a look here, that's about 45%. That's about 27. It's about 17, and that's about 10. So those values add up to about 100%. So I can tell that these are the four main exports by industry. I've got agriculture, mining, services, and manufacturing. Now, what other information can I get from this graph? Well, I can see that prior to this point here, in about 1982, agriculture was the main industry of export. It's the highest line in the graph. I can see that agriculture has decreased as an export industry over time to now it's the lowest. At this point here, what happens? In 1982, mining overtook agriculture as Australia's main export industry. I can see that from this point here to this point here, there was a boom in mining as an export industry. So that's from about, say, 2005 to 2010, mining dramatically increased as Australia's main export industry, with the value going up to about 55%. So that's a jump of about 20% increase in the industry. So a jump of 20% from 35% to 55%. And from 1982 to today, mining is Australia's largest export industry, compared with agriculture, services, and manufacturing. So there's lots of information I can get from that graph. Now, this paragraph shows you how I've collated all the information from all of the graphs into one paragraph. I've analysed the information and created one paragraph that describes them all. Mining is a profitable industry for Australia. According to the World Bank report in 1995, that was the first graph, Australia had the greatest natural wealth in the world, far outweighing the wealth of individual people. Exporting Australia's mined natural resources has meant that mining has become Australia's greatest export industry, with 37.6% of the country's exports coming from this profitable industry. That's the second graph. Figures are even more generous according to the Reserve Bank of Australia, the third graph, which indicates that exports from mining have increased a remarkable 20% from 2003 to 2010. And as of 2010, mining contributed 55% of Australia's exports, compared with 12% from manufacturing, 12% from agriculture, and 21% from services. It is clear from this data that mining is an Australian industry of international significance. So there's my attempt at summarising the information from all of the graphs, which is what you will need to do for your Prezi.